Welcome back to Learning Unity with the 3D Game Kit. In this video, we're going to get ready to take our 3D asset into Substance Painter for an initial texture bake. We'll walk through setting up the file properly for an explode bake, ensuring that all parts are positioned and configured to avoid baking errors. Then we'll perform our first texture bake to prepare the model for detailed texturing. That we'll go over in future videos. Let's get everything set up so we're ready to start adding some amazing detail to our project. So now that we have this all set up, we did our test bake in the previous video inside of Maya, I can start cleaning out my scene. I'm just going to hide these cameras that are attached to the image planes. I can actually delete my image planes, and we can go ahead and start combining and naming things. So I'm going to Shift P to unparent my game mesh. I'm just going to isolate this. And let's assign a new material to this. So I'm just going to assign new material. For the purpose of going into something like Substance, you mainly want the material name. So I'll just add a Lambert here. And we'll just go ahead and name this Lasergate. And that should be good enough. I'm going to bring this down just because things are so bright in Maya these days. From here, we can start to combine things that can be combined or keep them separated. It just depends on what we want to go for. Inside of Substance Painter, what I like to do is kind of combine things that are similar in chunks. There's not really a good perk to leaving them separate. The only reason we want to leave them separate is if we want to explode bake them out from something else. So what do I mean by that? Make it so they don't bake over the top of each other. And we talked a bit about that on the last video. We saw how the normal maps were kind of overlapping and causing issues. The purpose of the explode bake that we're going to do in Substance is to avoid that. So I'm going to take these three, for example, and I'm just going to come through and do a modeling mesh combine those together into one. And then we could go ahead and name these. So I don't know what we would call these, maybe projectors. And then we could come in here and I could go ahead and name this our pillar. And then I could come in and we could just make this our beam for laser. All right, so that's going to give us the various chunks that we're going to need for the low poly. I'm going to delete the history on those, free transforms, and then we can move up here to the high poly and repeat the same process. I'm going to leave this out of a group because we're going to want it out of a group for the purpose of going into Substance. All right, so let's go ahead and move the isolation off of our game object and onto our high poly. I'm going to Shift P to unparent these, and we'll go ahead and isolate these and do the same process. So just like I did with my low poly, I can combine these. We're going to do a mesh combine. I'll go ahead and delete the history here. And the pillar's good. This is good. So we'll just highlight these, edit, delete all by type history, do a freeze transformation, and then we can do a file optimize scene size to get rid of any unused groups or materials, and just hit OK. It looks like it didn't get rid of these groups, which is odd. It should have. I'll just go ahead and hit delete and hope those don't hurt anything. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to organize this so that we are getting the correct bake inside of Substance. The way Substance deals with explode bakes is by a naming convention where you use an underscore at the end and have low and an underscore high. And if you have them separated out by name, so this has the same name as this, it will find the low version, it'll find the high version, and it will just bake between those two. That way we can have it on top of each other and it looks really nice. So this pillar here, I'm just going to name this pillar underscore low. And then I can come to the high poly pillar now, and I could make this pillar underscore high. And I want to have low and high in all lowercase. Then I could come to the beam here. I can make that beam underscore low. And then I could come into the beam here, and I could make that beam underscore high. But you'll notice this beam's not the same shape. Remember, my beam high and low are the same. So I'll actually just hit Control D on this and name this high. Now, we do want these to be in the same order, which is kind of interesting. So I am going to move that up here to be underneath the high. That way they are in the same order. Then under projectors here, I'll go ahead and just name this projectors underscore low. I can double click and Control C to copy its name, Control V onto these ones, and just name them high. So now that we have this all sorted, we can go ahead and do a file save scene as for our projection bake. And what I like to do is actually come into my source images here. I'm going to create a new folder here called Lasergate. And I like to call this my bake file. So I'll just make this my Lasergate bake file. and do a save scene as. And we can go ahead and export these. So I'm going to start by grabbing all my low objects, coming up here to File and Export Selection, setting this to be on Object. This is my preferred method. And you do need to make sure that these are turned on over here. Otherwise, it won't keep the smoothing and it won't keep the name. So we're going to want to keep that there. Now, I'm going to put these into a source images folder in LaserGate here. And I'm just going to name this gate_low and hit export selection. Then we're going to repeat this process for the high poly. I'm going to select these, go to File, Export Selection, and in the same location, I'm going to do gate_high. Just like we did with the first, you want to make sure these are on. So now that we have these all set, we're ready to hop over to Substance Painter so that we can do our initial bake on this. So I'm going to open up Substance Painter, and we can go ahead and bring this in. All right, so let's go ahead and get set up here inside of Substance Painter. Looks like they changed the UI on me a bit since I've been in here last, so hopefully everything's working out well. I don't remember this log being here, so that's new for me. Anyways, I'll go ahead and put our hotkeys somewhere down here, up here. I don't know where to put them in here. We'll just put them down here, I guess, for now. I think we could probably close that log out, though. I don't see a point in having that. Anyways, let's come up here to our File, New, just create a new scene here. We can work at the same resolution, or we could go lower since it's iterative in here. We'll just keep it 2048. And coming to select here, we're just going to navigate to our location where we have our project set up here. So our object file. So I'm going to come to my LaserGate. We're going to grab the low. We're going to hit open, and we'll just hit OK to create our scene file. So that will bring our LaserGate in here. And what we can do now is we can do our bake. Now, to do the bake, we're going to want to come over here to our texture settings. We're going to want to scroll down. So I'm going to make some room here. Let's get rid of this export menu. First thing you got to do when you come into Adobe product is gut the UI. But we're going to come in here to the texture settings and scroll down here to the bake mesh maps. And we're going to click this to open this up. This should open our bake menu, and it looks something like this. Now, inside of here, we're going to make sure our output size is correct. So 2048, that is correct. What we're going to do is come down here, though, to link in our high poly. So just to show you guys, in case you didn't catch that, that's this file right here. We're going to click on that, and that's going to go ahead and bring in our high poly. So we'll bring gate high here. Give it a moment to load. What we're going to see over here is we're going to see our envelope. So we talked about that previously when baking in Maya. The way you control that down here is through the max frontal and rear. Usually I like to just crank the rear up all the way. Rear is going to be how deep it goes. Usually you can let it go pretty deep. And then we can adjust the max frontal here to where no red is showing. So I usually like to come down low and then just dial it in until we eat all the red. And you want to keep it as low as possible, but that should be good. Now, to make the explode bake work, we want to switch this from always to naming convention by mesh name. And you'll see that it's going to use the mesh name low and mesh name high here to do our bake. Now, at this stage, we're pretty much good to go. You can check what kind of maps you want to produce over here, and we might do some modifications on these. But just to make sure that the initial bake's working, let's click that Bake Selected Textures and see if it gives us the result we're expecting. I'm going to click that, and we can see what it does. So the initial look is looking pretty good. I don't see any major issues. And once we have that, we can click this Return to Painting Mode, and this will show us what our normal map looks like in three-dimensional space. Now, you will see we are getting this issue up here. So like I mentioned, this may be problematic. Why is this occurring? I don't know. Welcome to baking. The solution will probably be adding an edge loop here that matches up with our concept or our high poly in some way. We can always delete it later, which is something to be aware of. As far as the explode bake goes, it's looking pretty good. None of these seem super problematic. This one right here is looking a little weird. Maybe that's sticking out a bit too far, but I think it's catching an angle correctly from a distance, which is what we're kind of going for. That is a 90-degree edge, so it should have that hard edge. We could experiment without it. I also feel like it's showing up a little bit weird on the side, so we might have to experiment with that. But overall, I think it's looking pretty good. There is an AO here that I don't necessarily want, but I don't see any super major issues. Now, you might have to repeat this process several times, for example, up here, to get this to work right. So let's take a look at that on the pillar. First thing to check is the UVs. Is it a UV issue? And it doesn't look like it is. The UVs look fine. So to me, that means that's probably a projection issue. And what I can do is kind of take a look at where the high poly is, where that edge transition is, so right there. And I could just insert an edge loop here, running around this area, right about there. And what that should do is make it so the bake doesn't go all weird right there. It just kind of corrects it and doesn't have issues. It also could be because we have that soft edge there, but let's just double check that that's not problematic in here, and you'll see it isn't. So let's see what happens if we add that support edge to the bake. And part of me is actually happy this happened, which sounds weird, but it allows us to talk about this process because you do this a lot in game art. So now that I have that in place, I'm just going to delete the history on these. I'm going to grab my low and just my low. I don't need my high. I'm going to do another export selection, and I'm just going to overwrite my low here and export. Now, there might be a faster way to get this into here, but what I find usually works best is just going to File, New, just creating a brand new file here, selecting your low poly again, and baking until you get what you like. Like I mentioned, there's probably a way to reload your maps and your geometry, all that kind of stuff. I haven't found it, so I just go with what works. So we're going to come back to our bake mesh maps here. I'm going to go through it a lot quicker since we've already taken a look at this, and just get these things calibrated once again to have the same settings, so that way we're getting the results that we expect. Let's go ahead and do by mesh name, and I think we're good. We'll click bake, and we'll see what we get. So it still isn't fixing the issue, which is kind of interesting. That makes it a bit more complicated. So let me look at the high poly now and just see if it's a high poly issue. Well, it's most definitely not. So that's one of those things that's kind of interesting. Let me see from the front, though. That's something we haven't looked at. So it's just projecting the front. No, that still looks good. Ah, that's the issue. You can see here I put the edge too high up. So I put the edge up there. We could just add another edge. Like I mentioned, we can move these later. So let me turn off the UV so we can see this. And that is obviously in the wrong spot. I meant to put the edge here. So let me delete this one. And if I wanted to, I could actually add this edge here too, like that. I could even go as far as to add some points here if I needed to. But now that we have those in place, let's see if that works. It is quite a bit of a process to go back and forth until you get a good bake. This is probably the hardest part of creating a game asset, outside of all the other knowledge you need to have, right? You're probably like, wait a minute, isn't modeling hard? Yes. But this is the hardest part of getting it to work on a technical side. So it is a lot of back and forth. We could also be playing with the textures here. It could be how those are projecting. So we just have to experiment and find out. You'll see now we're getting a better result. It may not be perfect, but it is better. So we might need to take a look at using that in some other areas as well. But if I come in here now, you can see how that is looking a bit better. At least that corner. Now we're running into some sort of wonky issues here. So we can try and figure out what's going on there. I'm actually a little bit surprised we're running into issues with that, if I'm going to be honest. And the backside looks different than the front, which makes me wonder if it's a UV or if it's something else. So let's check out the UVs really quick. Sometimes you do have to do another UV layout. So let me do a quick unfold to see if anything changes on these. And it doesn't look like anything's changing with the unfold, so we can rule out UVs. We could add in more support detail. So this is kind of a weird thing, but I could potentially come in here with the UV shell here, same with this one, and do something like an edit mesh extrude. And we could bring in a support edge like this. That could be an option. I'm not going to do that here, though. I think we might just go with this as it is. Or I could consider adding, additional geometry. This is kind of strange, though. To have that sort of fix it, sort of not. Maybe if I add a couple more going down this angle here, it'll fix it. And I might want to check and make sure these are all soft, which is another interesting thing. So we'll go ahead and soften those. And it sounds weird, but what this is doing is basically making it so there's less stretching across the bake. So it's a very strange thing, but everything's recorded on vertices. So the more vertices you have, the better results you're going to get. Now, the nice thing is I can remove these later when it comes to creating the game mesh. So these are just for the bake, and it's what I mentioned earlier, that often your bake mesh is not your game mesh, because every now and then you just got to do weird stuff like this to make these areas work a little bit better. Now, unless this is completely horrendous, I'm probably going to keep this one as our mesh for moving forward. So just kind of a fair warning there. I'm not going to get mine to be perfect, but that should help a bit. And it does look like it's holding up nicely now. And hopefully that gives you an idea of how to troubleshoot some of these things. So I'm not troubleshooting it to perfection. I'd want to take a bit more time with it and see. The other thing it might be is actually the rear distance. So I didn't really think about this. Let's talk about that real quick. The rear distance is how deep it goes, and I may not have needed to add that geometry at all. Notice how the edges look a little bit wobbly here. It could be that I'm letting this project too deep. So usually I crank this up all the way, but in this instance, I might actually go just a little bit and try hitting the bake button and see if doing that actually fixes it. So sometimes that could be the cause. It looks like in this case that didn't help, so I'm just going to click cancel. And we can actually play around with some of these, right? So if I turn the rear off, we'll see some of these are just blank, which is kind of interesting. It looks like that didn't fix it, so it definitely got rid of it, though. You can see the rear does matter there. So it could be a factor. There could be like a sweet spot for that. I don't think that's it, though. Other things we could play around with are things like the relative bounding box here versus the non-relative. We could also try averaging the normals versus not. So if I change the relative here, you can see that we would bring this out further. We could see if that fixes the issue here without causing issues elsewhere. It doesn't, so I'm probably going to leave it be. I could click cancel. We could also try turning off average normals and see what result that gives me. So this would give us a flatter facing effect. And that actually fixes it. So you'll see those are nice and even now. So we can play around with these dials to, see what gives us the best result. Since this object is so flat, that might do the trick. The one area I'm concerned with is these edges, though. You can see that these aren't coming out so great, and neither are these. So this is where it's like, okay, well, you might have to try and stitch these back together. To keep things simple, we'll just average. We'll keep them relative, but hopefully that gives you some ideas there. I can also turn on anti-aliasing down here. I forgot to do that. 64 is excessive. It's going to cause you data issues. You can just set it to 16. And dilation width, that's going to be the dilation on the outside. You could also play around with turning on diffusion. That will kind of spread out the dilation. You're really only going to see that matter in the UV seams, so those are pretty negligible. So we can go ahead and give this a shot. We do know that if we turned off average normals for that one particular surface, it would give us what we're looking for. But in this instance, we're not looking to lose the quality on our edges. So let's see what this bake looks like. And if this looks good, I think we'll wrap things up here and we'll use this as our start file for texturing. And that brings up a good point. Sometimes you do have to settle for good enough, or you have to find a solution elsewhere. So in the case of this, I could composite a bunch of maps together to make this work. And that's probably what I would do in a professional capacity. Due to this just being kind of a demo and making this look good enough, I'm not going to worry about doing that. But that is something that I could do and re-import all these. But Honestly, that holds up fine from a distance. You know, it's going to give me the results that I need. My edges, you know, they're looking nice. They're looking clean. I am noticing that this is not flush to the surface in terms of geometry. So the top and bottom ones do look like they kind of got moved. That's something I may need to alter in the game mesh and the high poly. So that is something to look out for. Let's check that real quick in Maya. So let me check the game mesh here. It does look like, for whatever reason, those aren't sitting on the surface. They're actually clipping into it. I don't know if you guys can see that. So I'd want to make an alteration here. I'm just going to go into DV, so snap to vertex, and then just snap that to match the edge. And I'll do the same thing here. And then I'll repeat that process with the high poly. I actually need to do this on a shape-by-shape layer level because I converted, or I combined these, which is unfortunate. So I'm just coming in here into face mode now and hitting V to snap to vertex to getting those to align. So hopefully you guys won't have that issue. I don't know when that happened on mine. One of the downsides of lecturing is sometimes you're moving fast and you end up making mistakes like that. I'm curious though, the high poly ones all match up. So it happened maybe during the UV process. But that will help with those, so I can delete the history on that on the low poly. The low poly still looks fine. Looks like they're all matching. So I'll just delete the history on all these, and I'll repeat the bake process. Since we're doing this again anyways, I could look at this once more and decide if there's anything else I can do here, or if I even care about having these extra edges since they don't seem to support anything. There's nothing I can think of that would help here. The only thing that might help is if we made this a hard edge, which sounds kind of weird, but what that might do is make this project correctly. So let's try that real quick. I'm going to delete all of these, and in this pass, I'm just going to make this a hard edge. We're going to go ahead and click harden, and that might just be enough to make that front area interpolate correctly. So let's delete the history here. This will be my last Hail Mary here on making these work, and we can see if that gives us what we want. So let's go to new. Let's go ahead and bring in that low one, hit OK, discard that old bake, and then bake again. So bake mesh maps, bring in our high poly, and play around with this. Now, I think I accidentally put the low into here, didn't I? Oh. Let me check something real quick. Okay, that's the low poly for sure. Let me just re-export the high just to make sure. I don't know why I'm not seeing it here. I think I accidentally exported the low over the high. I think that's what's going on. There's some shenanigans here where the bake looked too good. So let me go ahead and refresh the scene. I'm pretty sure I accidentally did that. So just to make sure that you don't accidentally overwrite the wrong files. Now this should be good. Yep, that looks correct. Max rear distance, I'm going to pull that up. We'll just dial this down. I'm noticing this is working better now, which is good. That might just be what we needed in general. I may be able to soften that now. But we'll do by mesh name. I'll do anti-aliasing 16. I'm going to drop this down to 510 for a quick test, just to see if it's fixing our issues. And you can see now that this area is actually fixed, which is kind of interesting. So we need to determine if it was the hard edge that fixed it or if it was fixing everything else. But you'll see now that area is perfect. This is the issue with the hard edge, though. You can see how that's hard. So let's see if maybe just getting those into the correct position fixes everything. We'll just select that and do a mesh display soften edge now on our low. Delete the history on the low and just re-export again. And once you've done this for about your 100th time, you can do a victory lap and be happy because you got the perfect bake. So yeah, don't just settle for the first thing you get. Troubleshoot it and troubleshoot it and troubleshoot it until you've got it as good as you're going to get. because if you have a good bake, really the texturing is almost automated. And we'll take a look at that soon as we get a good bake. Okay, so now that we have that, you can see I can go much tighter on this, and I think that was the secret. By mesh name. This time I'm going to take a leap of faith and set that anti-aliasing to 16 with the 2048 texture. And hit bake, do one more look over, and if I don't see any major issues, we're going to call this good. But that's the process of kind of going back and forth, troubleshooting, trying to figure out what's the issue, and getting that perfect bake. So in this instance, one issue showed me there was an issue with my bake. It wasn't until I got up close and really analyzed things that I realized that the issue wasn't that corner. It was actually the beam supports I have down there being slightly offset. And that was causing me to use a larger frontal distance because things weren't matching 1-to-1, which was making that top corner bend when it shouldn't have to. So sometimes one issue that you're pursuing isn't the issue. It's in another place. So just be mindful of that. But hopefully this issue let you kind of see the process of troubleshooting when things don't go right, because you will be doing that a lot. So this area looks good now. No issues there. You can see that edge no longer has the really weird hardness. It has the nice bevel because we've softened that out. These here, if I get up close, they should all be laying flush to the surface. And we shouldn't be seeing any weird artifacting around them because they should be matching 1-to-1. And at this point, our high poly is done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit save on this and call this good for the bake. Major milestone here, getting this bake up. So let's do a save as, and I'm going to put this into my folder here. So we're just going to put this into my game asset, source images, and we're going to put this in LaserGate, and we'll just make this our LaserGate texturing 01. And we will pick up with this file when we get into the texturing section. Now, I'm going to wrap things up here. Baking is quite a bit of a process, so I want to give everyone an opportunity to get to this stage before we dive in and really start texturing it. So that's going to wrap up setting up our file for an Explode Bake and Substance Painter. You now have a clean and properly baked asset that's ready for the next steps, hopefully. And the next step will be texturing. In the next video, we'll dive into the fun part where we'll start adding realistic textures and bringing the model to life. If you're finding this series helpful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you're ready for the next tutorial. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.